What is the largest expense that sellers almost never see coming?
Holding cost when you've overpriced your listing.
Do I secure financing before I find the right boat or only after I've identified the vessel?
Before you find the boat, as early as possible.
And how often do you suggest that a buyer skips a pre purchase marine survey?
Never.
What's the first boat you ever owned, Amanda?
A 1993 Hunter 35.5 Legend.
Hello, and welcome back to Full Displacement, the podcast by Current Yachts. We're thrilled to have you today to discuss some of the most common questions that we get from clients here at Current Yachts. There's probably going to be more questions around buying boats because we find that those are more commonly, people who've never purchased a boat before. And when you sell a boat, I guess you have the advantage of knowing a little bit what the process is like because you bought that boat in the first place. So, Amanda, welcome back to the show, first of all.
Thanks, Marilyn. It's always fun to be here.
So, the first thing that we are trying to educate our clients around is the time that it takes to find the right boat and perhaps to even discover what the right boat is for you. So, in your experience, what's a reasonable time frame from strategy to finding the right boat?
That's an interesting question because for every person and every individual, it's different. I've been working with clients for 3 years before they find the right boat. And it can happen as quickly as a month from the time they start looking to the time that they have closed on the vessel. So that's probably the fastest I've ever seen it done. But yeah, it really varies depending on how quickly and how people have lined things up from the get-go, from the start.
Another thing we hear a lot is that powerboat buyers tend to be more impulsive versus the sailing boat buyer tends to research to death. And that's true a little bit, I think, with trawlers, people who intend to spend significant amount of time on board, perhaps research more in depth. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it comes down to personality traits. People who are just going to spend a day on the water don't have to put as much thought into it as someone who, say, is going to do the Great Loop and spend their entire life on this vessel. And it's going to be their home and the way something that takes them across oceans. People are obviously going to do a little more research on a vessel like that than a boat that they hop on in their backyard.
And to that, I'll put a little plug to the recent video that you recorded around the interior features that make the perfect Great Loop boat. So I'll put the link in the description below. Next question, should I hire a buyer's broker if I'm looking to buy a boat, or can I work directly with a listing broker to perhaps save money or save time?
Yeah, you can absolutely do both. And it comes down to how much do you know? If you feel that you're savvy enough to negotiate, knowing that the listing broker who you're going directly to when you ask all your questions has only the fiduciary responsibility of his seller in mind. When you go to him and you feel like you can fight for yourself and have an advocate and know all the ins and outs of the details of buying a boat, if you've bought 5 boats before, you probably could go directly to the listing broker. May you save some money? It depends on the structure. Most of the time, the 10% commission is set up front at the time of listing. So you're not really even saving much money going direct. When you use a buyer's broker, you actually have someone on your side who is your advocate. And I always recommend that, but it doesn't mean it has to be done that way.
To clarify, the traditional commission that you were just talking about, that's paid for by the seller. Well, technically, it's kind of paid for by the buyer because the buyer pays for the boat and the seller has calculated that there's going to be a 10%, say, built into the boat. And so if a buyer comes without their own broker, that just means that that listing broker then keeps both sides. In other words, they keep the same commission.
They keep the same commission, so they're actually making more. They're actually motivated to bring a buyer without a buyer's broker because they actually make more money that way. And it is built in that it's usually a 50-50 split depending on if that buyer's broker or that buyer's representative attends the survey, does all of the showings, takes the escrow money, is doing the paperwork side of the deal. That's how they earn that portion of the set aside commission amount that's built into the listing.
Okay, very good. So again, what this means is typically as a buyer, you don't really pay for that broker's commission when you have a buyer side broker because that will be compensated through that structure you're talking about, which is called co-brokerage. Now, I want to
Unless, of course, you're going to a private seller.
that was going to be my next question.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
should I buy from a dealer or broker or a private party, and what's the difference? So I think we're starting to get in there. So that's a perfect segue.
Yeah. Okay. So let's start with the dealer broker. Usually it's, sometimes it's a consignment. If you're going to a used boat that's there, sometimes they'll offer some type of service or maybe an extended warranty if you're going to a dealer slash broker. So that's nice. Private sellers can be emotional about their boat. And when you're speaking directly to them and you're trying to negotiate, they may have and hold on to the value of their vessel more than a third party representative who is there to do their job and get the boat sold. So there's a lot of nuance going to a private seller and buying directly from him. Now, a lot of the times they know all the details and know all of the history and all of the maintenance. So sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, but you have to know what you're getting into when you're going directly to a private seller without any representation.
We can speak perhaps to one recent example that we had where you had to actually help and educate that seller because they didn't know what they were doing, to be frank. So our buyer found
Sure.
this boat and you assisted them as the buyer side broker and ended up, going the extra mile, of course, but also trying to negotiate the emotions. Can you speak to that a bit?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, whenever you're dealing with a private buyer, they don't know. They're not another broker. So they don't know the steps of how a yacht sale goes. They don't know that it's normal to negotiate post survey for the findings. They don't know all of these things. So, on top of doing the brokerage service for our buyer, I'm then in the middle of teaching this private seller on how the boat sale goes. So, there's a lot to negotiate when you're going to a private seller, and sometimes they can be reasonable, sometimes they're not reasonable. And that's just the luck of the draw on who you have selling the boat.
And so if I'm a buyer and I'm looking to get financing lined up, what would you say is the right time to do so? If I'm just like a week or two before closing, is that what you're typically seeing, or what do you recommend?
No, definitely not a week or two before closing. You have to know how much money you have to shop. And so I always tell people get your financing in order long ahead of time. So that way you know if you can buy a $300,000 boat or maybe a $700,000 boat. Those are drastically different boats. And if you don't know your budget, how can you go shopping? The worst thing is to look at a $700,000 boat, fall in love with it, want to make an offer, and then find out that your budget is drastically lower than your dream boat. So it's better to set your expectations for yourself that you know that you can afford a $350,000 boat and nothing higher. That way, you're also not wasting the time of the broker looking at all these different boats that unfortunately you will never be able to afford. And that comes down to getting good financing and knowing what you can afford.
And I'll add a little note to that sometimes people are really surprised by the approval that they receive. They don't get approved for as much as they thought because they come with expectations that don't really hold water, if I can say so, when you're looking to buy a yacht. And there's a lot of reasons for this. So I definitely recommend that you talk to your finance broker early for that reason. It's because there's often a misalignment with what you think you'll be qualified for and what is available to you. So we won't go into too much details. We have all the videos about the topic, but if you look in the marine directory that is on the Current Yachts website, you can find people to talk to and ask these questions. So definitely recommend you do that and as early as possible for those reasons. Let's talk about price and negotiation. We started, talking about this. How much should I negotiate off the asking price when I'm looking to make an offer? And what is realistic in today's market, knowing that we know we're in a buyer's market? There is more inventory. The days on market are getting longer. So what are we seeing now and what is typical?
Well, we did a report, Marilyn, to be able to answer this question perfectly, actually. So, what we found is that boats are on the market for anywhere from 6 to 9 months, and they're going for 6 to 8% under the last asking price. So, a boat may start out when it first lists at 700,000. Then 2 weeks later or a month later, it drops down, drops down, drops down. And then by the time it actually goes under contract, we're finding that the boat sells for 6 to 8% under the last asking price. So, as a broker and a buyer comes to us and says, I want to offer X amount of dollars on this boat, it could be, you know, 50% of the asking price. I legally have to present that offer to my seller. He may say no, he may get offended, he may not even offer a counter. But legally, whatever the buyer wants us to bring to the table, we have to bring it to the table. I recommend that you never ask anything under 10% under the asking price, because at that point, the person has thought about this. They've said, okay, I have this addition, I have these extras, and therefore, I think the boat is valued at X. And that's why there's a set asking price. And to offer much less than that, everybody wants a deal, right? Everybody wants a deal. But to offer much less than that can be insulting and may not even get a good counter from the seller.
And another thing I was going to add too is that we provide those data points to our buyers so they are well aware of what current market conditions are. What are these boats selling for today? And what have we seen in the last, say, 6 months of time on market and things like that? So you are not just walking blindly and making a lowball offer out of nowhere. However, if a boat is not priced very well, in your opinion, based on the data we supply, we can strategize. But I think the rule of thumb of not going below 10% makes sense because there are a lot of reasons the boats are priced the way that they are.
Yeah. And if you see that obviously the boat is way higher than every other boat in the market, of course you can offer less than the 10%. But we're going to educate you. We're going to give you a market analysis, show you how many boats are currently on the market at this time, how many have sold recently and at what price point and after how long. We'll be able to give you all of these specific details for your boat because everyone is different. But these are averages that we saw over a class period.
The other thing to remember is that the percentage you were mentioning, below asking, this is when it's all said and done. So sometimes an offer might be 5% below asking. It ends up perhaps 8% below asking after survey because there's negotiation involved. So, it's a multi-step process. And actually, speaking of survey, if a buyer finds some issues, how do you decide what is a deal breaker versus normal wear and tear? I mean, have you had a survey recently that the clients were like, yes, this is not going to work? You don't even have to wait on the report. You kind of move on. What does that look like?
Yeah, I think it comes down to the buyer's threshold of risk and how much work they're willing to put into the boat. There are some buyers that are like, nope, I just want a turnkey boat that I can step aboard, turn the key, and go sailing. There are other people that are really into tinkering and want to fix these things. And they may choose a boat that has old AGM batteries because they want to actually put in lithium and solar. So that might be a plus to them. And they might not even be scared away by the fact that they have to redo the standing rigging or that they have some major upgrades and outfitting to be done because they want to put in their own special things. So it really depends upon the threshold. When it comes to structural, you have to remember for your own resale value, structural issues happen to be something that follows the boat that you will have to disclose when you go to sell the boat. So let's say there is a structural issue and you do have to retab and you do have to cut out a certain portion and put that in. Make sure that you document that because it can be a plus or a minus if you don't have any documentation. If you have actual bulkhead issues or retabbing that needs to be done, and you have a beautiful history of how well that was redone and how much better the reinforcement of that fiberglass is after you were done, that actually can be a selling point because the boat is now that much stronger than it was initially. But if you don't have any of that paperwork, you can see how then that would be a red flag for someone moving forward, or they may take off a certain expense saying, oh, well, it had this issue before. Now I know I may have to deal with that next if you don't have the proof that you fixed it and fixed it fully. So it really just depends on the threshold of the person's willingness to put work into the boat. And as long as you can go into a decision with your eyes wide open, knowing, yes, I have to cut out this portion of the coring and I have to then reseal it and I have to then retab these certain portions of the boat. That can be a lot of work. It can be daunting. And it may be more than the first buyer's threshold of wanting to put work into the boat. And at that point, they may want to move on to the next.
Yeah, and sometimes we see boat listings that will say as is, but then that does not mean you can't have a survey. It just means that the seller isn't going to do any work to it. So you have
They're
to be
not
aware.
willing to negotiate post that survey. It's like, okay, I've told you what I think is wrong. This is the price I'm willing to accept for the boat. If you find anything outside of that, I'm not changing my price. I'm not willing to negotiate post survey. Correct. Because remember, it's the buyer that pays for the survey. They're allowed to to do that.
Now, if a boat has been on the market for over 6 months, potentially a year, is that a concern to you as a broker? How do you guide clients that are looking at time on market and see concern or opportunity? Which is it?
Well, in today's market, the average boat is on the market 6 to 8 months. That's how long it's taking to sell a boat. It's quite a long time. And it depends on what class of boat you're in. If you have a very sought after Katie Krogan, it's not going to be on the market very long. Those boats move quickly. If you have a Beneteau Oceanus, where they've made hundreds of them, your boat most likely will sit on the market unless you're aggressively priced or you have a billion upgrades and it's the best boat on the market at the time. So it really just depends on the class, but 6 to 8 months is how long we're seeing. And just because a boat has sat on the market for a long time, you have to hear the history. You have to understand why. It could be that the boat was on the hard during the winter and wasn't able to be surveyed. And so for those 4 months, it actually just stayed on the market. No one was able to even preview it. So you have to just kind of look at the timeline and the history and ask the broker, why has this boat been on the market so long?
And this is a really good kind of a wake up call too for sellers who are not pricing properly, or perhaps their broker is not nudging them when things are, not moving and no leads coming through. What are you going to do? Have you factored in to pay for your holding cost on this boat for another 6 months? If you price the boat aggressively from the start, I feel like the chances of leaving money on the table are actually less, but we're happy to help you run the math if you have that question. So keep that in mind too.
Absolutely. It's very important to price aggressively if you want to move quickly. If you're willing to wait and you're willing to see what the market will bear, set it at the price you want.
All right. Another question we've gotten is, I found the perfect boat, but it's really stretching the top of my budget. Should I go ahead and stretch or keep looking?
So that comes down to the lifestyle. If stretching to buy that boat that you really want is going to get you out on the water faster and enjoy this sailing experience or this boating experience sooner, I would say stretch a little bit, but know that you may not be able to do that upgrade, or you may not be able to do that bottom paint, or you may not be able to do that refit of those ACs because you stretch your budget in the front end. And carrying costs and the way you're going to live, whether you're going to stay on the hook, whether you're going to go to the marinas, all of those things really make a difference in how much it costs to carry your boat. Insurance costs, all of those things. That's why we have that checklist to say, how much will it really cost me to own this boat and to use it and to play with it and have fun?
Yeah, I was going to ask you next, beside buying the boat, what are some of these ongoing costs that we're not thinking about? Can you name the top three that people don't
Yeah,
realize
the top
add up
3
really?
are the diver who cleans the bottom. That's definitely one. The diver that cleans the bottom, a lot of people forget about that. And the maintenance that will take to keep the boat clean, compounding and waxing in the Southeast where I live in the Caribbean environment is a must. If you don't compound or at least put a coat of wax on the boat every 4 months, the boat will be milky within the year. And then you'll have to do a full compound and wax, which will end up costing you more money than if you had just put a layer of wax on the boat every 4 months or every 3 months. So it really depends. You have to put these things in your head and say, yes, every 3 months I'm going to be waxing my boat. Every month I'm going to hire a diver to come down and slough off the growth. Those types of things will clear your intakes. That will keep your ACs working better. All of those things come into the maintenance that people don't think of when it's, hey, I want to get on the boat, turn the key, and go have fun.
Yeah, so definitely cleaning the bottom, the top sides, and just keeping the boat clean. I guess we'll put these as one and two. And I guess third, we should probably talk about insurance because people don't really realize the cost of insurance, or
Yeah.
they expect that it will go down if they're a first time boat buyer, and it doesn't happen right away, right?
Right. Insurance cost and birthing costs sometimes are
Oh,
a
yeah,
lot more
for
than
sure.
people would have ever thought, depending on the area that they live in. I've had some deals completely fall apart because they found out that in order to keep this boat behind someone's house, it was going to be $1,500 a month just to keep the boat there. And they thought, oh, well, once you buy the boat, isn't it free to like anchor it out? Not exactly, unless you want it to be stolen or sunk or robbed. Or, unless you have a full-time liveaboard.
To give you a sense of that, the cost, last I checked in Annapolis for a 45-foot sailboat for the annual contract was about $12,000 plus electric. And you can get into cheaper rates when you obviously look elsewhere. There's a complex of marinas here in Tracy's Landing, not too far from the DC area, and you can keep your boat there for probably closer to $7,000 or $8,000. So comparing your options is important. Talk to boaters around you to find those options, but definitely use that spreadsheet that Amanda was talking about. And again, we'll put that link also in the description. Next question for you is, how do I evaluate whether a boat has been well maintained without being a mechanic myself? And also, I would add, to kind of spare myself the trouble before scheduling a survey that may reveal things I don't want to hear. So, how do you look at those things on any boat for yourself, Amanda, and with your clients?
It's funny. I was crawling in a boat just yesterday, and a lot of it has to do with the things you see, the spares that you see. The sailor or the boater that came before you, were they prepared? Do they have all the extra little bells and whistles inside the bilges right next to where you're looking? And I said, when I was looking at this boat, I said, well, this was a real sailor. He had extra this, extra that, extra this, all sitting right there. Whereas rust is just a big indicator. If you're seeing signs of rust, if you're seeing dirty bilges, if you're seeing um, the regular wear and tear, that shows how they maintain the vessel. So it makes a difference to pay attention to what kind of accessories you see on the boat. Is something as small as a life jacket. I was looking, and there were really nice Mustang inflatable jackets, and the other boat had the orange PFD still in the plastic container shoved underneath the locker. So looking at those types of things will tell you what kind of boater they were in the past, how much they actually used their boat, how much they maintained their boat, the records that they kept. Not necessarily. I'm guilty of this. I'm not the best record keeper. It doesn't mean I didn't maintain my boat. I just didn't organize it well. And some people are like that as well. So you just kind of have to weigh the comparisons and see. But looking inside a boat, looking inside the bilges will tell you a lot.
Yeah, I'll add to that, looking in the engine bay and just seeing how well that's been kept. If you see a lot of drippings and even like metal shaving or rust or stains, like that's not great. And then I'll point you also to the episode we did on rigging that talks a lot about how to visually inspect and look for, the telltales of a rig that may need to be replaced. So another question that we hear a lot is, should I buy close to me, or is it worth traveling for the right boat? How do you decipher that?
If you're just a day cruiser who's going to keep the boat on a trailer in your backyard, I would say stay within your immediate circle. It's not really worth it to go get a boat unless it's such a classic, unique boat that can't be found anywhere else. Then, of course, travel to get that boat. But if there's 5 Boston whalers and one is halfway across the United States and there's 2 more in your local area, I definitely go towards the local one. When it comes to blue water sailors or cruisers, then I would say if there is a significantly better boat that was possibly kept in fresh water, like up in the Great Lakes, and those boats are significantly in better shape, usually than boats that are kept down in a saltwater environment in the Caribbean. So it really depends on what you want, what you're looking for, and considering those factors and your own threshold of how far you're willing to go to get a boat, bring it back. Sometimes that's one of the best adventures.
Yeah, but I think we also should really encourage buyers looking farther away to look into the cost to hire a crew or to truck a boat that they want to buy from far away, because that cost really comes into the equation quickly to tell you whether or not it makes sense. And it's very easy to underestimate that cost. I mean, we talked about the cost of delivery captains if you're not able to bring that boat yourself to where you're going. That is not a small expense. Question that we get a lot: the paperwork, right? People are really just unsure what a yacht sale entails. So what paperwork and legal steps am I responsible for as a buyer versus you as my broker? Can you explain a few of these things, Amanda, for us?
As a buyer, you're basically going to get a bill of sale. As a seller, you actually have to give us a lot more paperwork and a lot more details. We actually have a full podcast just on all of the documentation that goes into that. As a buyer, you really want to look for a clear abstract of title, meaning there's no liens against the vessel, and getting a bill of sale so that you can then register that vessel in your name.
And the registration is not something you have to delegate, though it's sometimes helpful to have a documentation agent help you. But a lot of it can be done really easily, whether you're going to be registering the boat at the federal level, called U.S. Coast Guard documentation, or at the state level. So again, we're trying to just break it down, keep it really simple. There are going to be a few other steps that you'll want to do for the boat, such as, registering that MMSI for your VHF and all that jazz. We can talk about those details. But as far as ownership, you have this agreement of purchase, and then you have a bill of sale that confirms the transfer of ownership. And that bill of sale is only signed by the seller once you're the owner of that boat. You're going to take care of perhaps, changing the name on the boat. Obviously, you have binding coverage, insurance coverage by then. So those are the clear things that you need to have in place is financing, if that's you, and insurance. So you were talking about liens. What that means too is if a boat is financed, the seller will have to pay off that loan at closing. So whether you use our services to handle that escrow or trust fund, or you use an outside escrow service, they will make sure that out of the proceeds, the lender is paid off and the loan is closed off. And one other thing that perhaps you can speak to is if a boat is purchased in Florida, but someone will take the boat out of Florida, can you give us this one quickly? I know it's covered in that video that talks about the
Yeah,
12 documents, but this one is really important.
sure. It's called an affidavit of removal. So if the boat is going to stay in Florida, then of course taxes need to be paid and a Florida registration needs to be put on that vessel in the new owner's name. But if a boat is in Florida, sold in the state of Florida, you will then get a sticker on the vessel that gives you anywhere from 3 to up to, I think, 6 months to remove that vessel. And basically, what you do is you will tell the state, I'm going to be taking this boat outside of the state of Florida, and I will send you either some type of a receipt from a marina or a gas station outside of the state of Florida to prove that I did leave Florida. And then you send that in, and then the state of Florida will not come after you for any tax.
So you'll want to do that.
Yes. Affidavit of removal, it's called.
And I was just curious on this one. What's the most expensive mistake that you've seen first time boat buyers almost get into, or that you've seen them make maybe prior to working with us? Tell us about that. What have you seen?
I would say people who are just so enamored with the dream and not thinking through decisions, like stepping on the first boat that they've ever seen and making an offer on that boat without educating them and seeing and trying other boats. So, I always caution someone, you may think this is your dream boat. It may be your dream boat. This may be the best boat you ever step on, but let's go look at this boat and this boat and this boat over here so that you have a comparison to say, now I see why I still want to go back to that original boat that I was focused on in the beginning.
Another thing too that I've heard, actually just this weekend, looking for a boat and then seeing that boat perhaps out of the water at a boat show, and then going to see that little, twin outboard powerboat in the water, you just kind of get a different feel for it. And that boat can grow on you. And then all of a sudden you're like, wait, I really like this layout. This is very smart. I didn't think I would like it, but actually I do. So what you learn as you see more boats too, you can come back to and evaluate options that perhaps you didn't look at carefully in the beginning. So it's a ongoing process.
Yeah, definitely broaden your horizons and your thought processes. We were working with a client just the other day who said, no, I really want this kind of boat, X. And then we brought them to see this boat over here. And we're like, well, come on, you might like this one too. And then their eyes were opened and they are now looking at these types of boats. Keep your eyes and your mind open. If we suggest a model and we think you might like, be willing to at least look at it and then say, no, not for me.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for these answers, Amanda. And as you're listening to this podcast, you probably have more questions. So whether you are on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or on YouTube, you can post your comments below for us to find out what questions do you have for us, and we'll answer them in a future episode of Full Displacement. Thanks for tuning in today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe and share it with a friend. And we'll see you on the next one. Fair winds.
Fair winds.